In today's episode of This Week in Podcast, we'll highlight training and nutritional strategies from longevity expert Dr. Peter Attia. We'll distill Stephen A. Smith's formula for success and feature Simon Sinek's drive for a purposeful life. As a dad of 3 young boys with a full-time job, I know it's nearly impossible to dedicate the time needed to consume the useful content that's out there. So my world-class team and I work really hard to research and summarize insights that you can put into action today to become a better version of yourself. Let's dive into our first podcast, which is a conversation between Tim Ferris and Dr. Peter Attia. They walk through action-based tactics within an overall strategy to grow bigger, stronger muscles, improve VO2 max, fight neurodegenerative disease such as Alzheimer's. They also talk about a concept, Medicine 3.0, and they cover a variety of tests which may give you deeper insight into your health and wellness. Let's get started. To support muscle hypertrophy, Dr. Attia recommends consuming a gram of protein per pound of body weight each day. And that's broken up into 20 to 50 grams of protein per meal. He also recommends supplementing with a high-quality whey protein shake. He prefers animal sources for his protein, both for the bioavailability of the protein as well as the quality of amino acids. And those that are considering or currently on a ketogenic diet will know that if you consume too much protein, that'll actually kick you out of ketosis. So that's why he recommends that 20 to 50 gram range per meal or shake. As it pertains to amino acids, Dr. Attia tries to consume about 2 grams of methionine, 6 to 8 grams of lysine, and 6 to 8 grams of leucine per day. Of the amino acids, leucine is your best friend when it comes to muscle hypertrophy, as it's a powerful stimulator of a protein called mTOR, which is mammalian target of rapamycin. And mTOR regulates cell growth and survival. While mTOR activity can be helpful for muscle growth, chronic stimulation can actually be harmful to longevity and lead to uncontrolled cell growth associated with cancerous acts. So if you think of leucine as the gas pedal on mTOR, you want to pump the brakes on mTOR with green tea. Green tea contains EGCG, which can inhibit mTOR. So think of adding green tea to your nutritional plan. These 2 tables show the protein and amino acid profile of high protein foods. We all know strength training can protect our bodies, but Dr. Attia and his team found that exercise is the most important habit to combat cognitive decline and diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. In fact, kinesthetic awareness and grip strength are directly correlated to healthy longevity and decreased risk of dementia on. Another consideration for our strength training to support longevity is that as we age, our ability to move explosively and control our movements decrease due to the atrophy of our type 2 muscle fibers through a process called sarcopenia. So to combat this, we need to focus on both the concentric and eccentric phases of our movements. Think of the concentric phase as the go or explosive phase, and the eccentric is the slowing down or loading phase of our strength training movements. To apply this focus in our strength training, let's look at an example. So as you're executing a squat and you're lowering your body to the ground, use a slow tempo of 4, 3, 2, 1, and then explosively extend through the concentric phase of your squat. Now, this concept can apply to hundreds of different exercises, single-legged exercises, or upper body movements. We're focusing on the lower body specifically because it will help us to control our acceleration and deceleration. This eccentric focus is particularly important because as we age, the majority of injuries happen during the eccentric phase of a movement in daily life. Think of stepping off of a curb, walking down the stairs, going down a hill. Dr. Attia recommended rucking, which is a type of backpacking, as a fantastic way to test and improve your body's kinesthetic abilities, accelerating, decelerating under control, particularly when you're going up and down hills, without beating up your body. And he talked about GoRuck.com as a reference. He talked about the need to be able to carry half your body weight in one hand for 1 minute. So work on those suitcase carries and those body hangs to improve your grip strength. Let's work on that VO2 max 3 days a week. Dr. Attia recommends 2 of those days you're working 30 to 60 minutes in zone 2, which means you can speak, but you don't want to. So if you can easily talk while you're exercising, you need to turn up the intensity. The 3rd day is your interval day. And that's where you're working at a much higher intensity, 3 to 8 minutes of work paired with 3 to 8 minutes of rest. Now, the key to this is if you were to do 4 minutes of work, you would need 4 minutes of rest to repeat 4 more minutes of work at the same intensity. So, including a warm-up and cool down, Dr. Attia recommends 4 minutes of work, 4 minutes of rest, 4 times. There were 2 particularly poignant moments for me in the podcast. The first was Dr. Attia said, "To live long and suffer is not to live." The second was when he talked about his time in recovery, and he said, "Fake it until you make it." And I know that's received criticism lately because it smells of insincerity, but I like to think of that as I'm living in alignment with my aspirations. There are a lot of characteristics that don't come naturally to me, but if I act as if I have that characteristic, those characteristics, those ideals will eventually come naturally to me, and I will become the man that I aspire to become. This table shows a handful of tests that can give you deeper insight into your health and wellness, your longevity, as well as your susceptibility for disease and cognitive decline. In his interview with Ed Mylett, Stephen A. Smith opens up about his life's journey and the struggles he faced along the way. From being held back twice in school, battling dyslexia, his journey was not easy, but this guy was not afraid of the grind. He worked really hard to excel. He has ultimately become a super successful media personality. And he shares his insights on self-awareness and humility and responsibility. Let's dig in. Stephen A. shared this heartbreaking story. He was held back twice in school, and he was carrying around this shame and humiliation every day. He's coming home from school and getting picked on by kids, so he runs home and lays down on his back porch, and he's crying, and he overhears his mother and father talking, and his father says to his mother, "Give up on him. Stephen A. is not smart. He'll never amount to anything." I couldn't imagine the devastation of hearing something like that. He was eventually diagnosed with dyslexia, and with the help of his sister, he worked really hard to master the English language. In fact, that has become his trademark. He has turned that weakness into an ultimate strength of his mastery of the language. There were 7 takeaways from this interview that were impactful to me. The first was Stephen A. talked about his power to persuade comes from his depth of conviction, his depth of experience. He's not trying to convince anybody of anything, but people eventually become convinced because of the depth of his convictions. The second keystone element from this interview was successful people know they have finite amount of energy and focus. They don't waste it worrying about what others are doing, what others are getting, what others are thinking, only focusing on yourself and what you can create. A third takeaway from this interview was Stephen A.'s work to master his craft. Know the athletes, know the story, get your facts straight, constantly digging deeper to master his craft. There was an incredibly influential time in Stephen A. Smith's career where his contract was not going to be renewed at ESPN, so he was left without a job. And he still had this deep relationship with his mother, so he went and stayed with his mom for a few days. And he had been there a while, and his mother had a very honest conversation with him and told Stephen A. in no uncertain terms that he was in this situation with no career prospects because of himself, because of his attitude, because of his complaining. He was cancerous to his teammates. He wasn't helpful to his organization, and that was squarely on him. And she asked him, "What changes are you going to make?" And from that moment on, Stephen A. embraced these 4 bullet points. First, he would never complain again. The second bullet point was Stephen A. would take full responsibility from that moment on. Just as Jocko Willink talks about extreme ownership, the conditions in your life are specifically and directly tied to you and your actions. Stephen A. embraces humility. He understands that he got to where he got because of a whole lot of people working hard together and maintaining that humility. Stephen A. also talked about the need for self-awareness. I was new to an organization as a senior leader, and I had come up with what I thought was a brilliant idea to help scale our business. And it was different than how the business had been run before I came. And so I was presenting the idea to a group of employees. The way I was presenting the idea was more of like, I've made this decision and we're unilaterally going in this direction. While reading the faces in the room, it was pretty obvious that my idea wasn't being embraced. So after the meeting, I asked one of the employees to stay behind and talk to me. She had been with the organization from the beginning, so she had this very important institutional knowledge. And I said, "Hey, what's up?" She explained to me that she probably would have endorsed the idea. However, she wanted to be included in the decision-making process, give some input. I was so wrapped up in my own idea and my own brilliance that I was unaware of myself, unaware of my approach. It is so important to stay self-aware. I'm in my first leadership role, and my team and I had just completed our first 2-day deep dive education event for executives in the tech industry. These events were to be our trademark, open up brand new opportunities for our business. Well, the event didn't go so well. So we were doing a post-event debrief with my boss, and I had my list ready of everybody's shortcomings. And as we get into the meeting and my team starts to share their feedback, it becomes really obvious that the event didn't go so well because of my lack of leadership. And I became so angry and embarrassed and ashamed that I was interrupting and became aggressive. And I devolved what was supposed to be a constructive conversation into an argument. And naturally, my team shut down. And so after the meeting, my infinitely patient boss explained to me what had happened. And I'd become so blinded by my emotions, I couldn't see what was going on. Simon Sinek talks about this exact scenario, as well as other leadership topics about developing meaningful relationships and living with purpose in his episode with Stephen Bartlett in the Diary of a CEO. So let's dive in. Simon kicked off the podcast talking about building meaningful relationships through sincerity and vulnerability. He shared a story where he was giving a speech and he lost his train of thought. And being the world-renowned speaker that he is, he had all these tactics to try to bring himself back into focus, and he was still at a loss. And he finally said to the crowd, have you ever had a moment where you've lost your train of thought? Your life is flashing before your eyes and you don't know what to do. You're panicking. He said, I'm experiencing that right now. And I'm actually excited about that because that means I'm alive. Crowd applauded. Finally, somebody shouted to him what he had just said so he could get back his train of thought. And it was that vulnerability that he shared about experiencing darkness and fear that made it relatable and human. Simon then shifted the conversation to relationships and how we can successfully support each other in difficult times. He was reporting to military leadership about his experiences with the troops on the ground. And as he's telling the stories, he became choked up as he was thinking about the selfless contributions that these people constantly make. As the leadership are listening to him, they say, go on as in we're here with you. And that experience is what started Simon on the Leaders Eat Last book that he wrote. In fact, he's taken that same attitude of go on to support his friends when they're struggling. He doesn't try to solve anything, he sits in the mud with them. I think about the times that I try to support my friends when they're struggling and I immediately go into fixing mode. I think it's because I'm validating myself as opposed to selflessly being there for somebody sitting in the mud with them. The conversation then turned to leadership. Simon spoke of the importance of earning trust through self-awareness, empathy, alignment with you and your team so you can build a strong foundation and then confidently and successfully navigate chaos and uncertainty. And you as a leader can balance being in command and control and those moments of seeking feedback. And just as I experienced in those moments of feedback, Simon says that if you feel strong emotions bubbling up as you receive the feedback, you need to pause because there's truth in the feedback that you're receiving. There's also a consideration for accountability. Taking accountability in that exact moment may not be the right timing. Tempers may be flaring, the audience may not be right, but think about accountability down the line and how that will continue to engender trust between you and your team. Simon also talked about that you can learn just as much from a good leader as you can from a bad leader. Simon talks about the importance of developing trust as a leader and the exponential impact it can have on your teammates. So if we were to chart you on this table, the higher up the y-axis, your job-specific performance is better. And if we were to chart you to the right, you are more trustworthy, meaning I can trust you with my money and my wife. So ideally, you want you and your teammates up here in the top right quadrant. However, the majority of American corporations hire for and reward people up here. They do none, if any, measurements around their leadership being trustworthy. So Simon interviewed SEAL Team 6, the best of the best of the best, and asked them what they look for. And they look for individuals that are middle to high, middle to middle low performers, but are way over to the right on the trustworthy scale. They value this over this. And as a leader early in my career, I was over here. My team couldn't trust me. Look what happened when they were open and honest with me. I was argumentative. I beat them down. So I had to work really hard to move to the right on the trustworthy scale. I was an asshole. I was over here. Don't be an asshole. The conversation then shifted to Simon's own life, and he talked about measuring success by momentum, not achievement, and his desire to leave the world in a better state than he found it. He also encourages others to find their own purpose in life. And we start to see this reoccurring concept of trust with Simon. Early in his career, he didn't have his why, and he was listening to others that were more successful in their advice, and it just didn't resonate with him. So he started to explore this concept of start with why, and he trusted so deeply in his own work that he dug in with no time expectations, and that allowed him to be on the successful career path he's on now. There was a particularly impactful part of the interview when Simon was talking about his experiences of being embedded with the military in Afghanistan. He wasn't able to leave on his original departure date, and he was freaking out. He felt no sense of purpose, and so he made a decision to get involved in anything, speak with the troops, move boxes, sweep floors. It didn't matter. And he immediately felt a sense of calm, a sense of excitement. He realized it was because he was serving those who serve others. And that profound realization gave him true sense of purpose. Simon interviewed a surgeon who also spends time with the civilian population. And the surgeon said that the majority of people he sees in the emergency room are jerks, drunks. They're in the emergency room because of their own actions. But he said that there aren't anybody in the military like that. They're not jerks. They're not making stupid mistakes. He felt a true sense of purpose serving those who serve others. The surgeon went on to say that the skills that he's learning by working on the military, he takes with him back to the civilian population. So even when the military are wounded, they're still serving us. Rolling up today's episode, here are the tactics I'm going to implement. I'm going to eat more protein throughout the day. I'm going to integrate green tea into my daily routine. I'm going to add more eccentric focus on my lower body lifts, particularly my single leg movements. I'm going to stop complaining. I'm going to stop rushing through my day and the conversations, interactions, and waiting for somebody to stop talking so I can interject my ideas. I'm going to slow down and be present so I can be interested in other people. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to get this channel off the ground, but Stephen A. preach, tunnel vision, focus on the next step. If I look too far ahead, I become overwhelmed. Tunnel vision. Lastly, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. Nobody has the time to wade through all the content that's out there. I'm going to do my best to summarize the tactics and deliver them to you every week. Thanks for watching.